We hadn't always been here, but the neighborhood has. Even before it was a neighborhood on Earth, this one had been here. Here for those that would be lost on those cursed grounds. Here for those who would die long before their real life ever truly began. Here for those who really never wanted to really grow up. We come from different times. We come from different lives. But one thing's remained true of all of us. We lived on the earthly realm of the neighborhood at some point in our lives and died long before our time was supposed to come. We don't remember much of our lives in the cul-de-sac since the last member of our group joined us, and certainly we won't remember now when the next spirit comes. But here's what we do know. Rolf was the first to come. Unlike most of us, he was born in far-off lands, and even in the afterlife hasn't lost touch of his old world. He lived in the neighborhood before it was developed. The son of a shepherd, he and the rest of his family came to start a farm on the lands that would soon turn to a place where we would all eventually reside in. He died in 1903 while tending to the farm animals. A bull broke loose from its pen, and in Rolf's efforts to stop the beast, he was trampled to death. And that is why, even though he brought many of his family livestock with him in spirit, he chose not to bring the cow along. He continues to go along the farm's business on a daily basis, but is more than happy to occasionally collect them to pay with the other children of the neighborhood. Johnny was always the lonely child. In fact, Rolf actually became his first human friend ever when he came to the cul-de-sac after his death. His parents moved onto the ground of Rolf's former farm not long ago after his death. With no other children around, and no field work to take up his time as it did Rolf's, Johnny drew into his own mind to a great extent. From the plank was born, together they wandered about the countryside, climbing trees and getting themselves into trouble. Sadly, this didn't last forever, as a few years later Johnny became bedridden with illness. In 1922, he died after a long bout with tuberculosis. He saw his imaginary friend Plank standing by him to his last breath. Even now in the afterlife, without the countryside to play in, Johnny still wastes much of his time frolicking in the backyard and streets. Sarah and Ed were next to come, not too long after that. By the late 40s, the cul-de-sac has nearly taken its final form, as one of the pre-planned developments had become popular in the post-war era. Sarah had become enraged and controlling as she thought to make sure that everyone around her knew that she was in charge, all in an attempt to copy off her in her view of the hustle and bustle of her often working mother. Ed, on the other hand, went about it in a different way. He just shut out entirely. In fact, he shut out nearly everyone and everything in the world, entirely becoming what appeared to be a complete idiot. Ed chose instead to become completely involved in the monster movies and comic books that began to pop up after the war had ended. It wasn't too long after that, in 1953, Ed and Sarah died in a car wreck as their mother was taking them to visit their grandparents. Naz came a time after their brother and sister. Naz was a flower child, born to a pair of hippies turned establishment in the late 60s. She was naturally a beautiful girl that always had a way with boys and men alike. She lived a life on a whim and would often go about flirting and playing without any intentions. She died in possibly the most horrible way of any child in the neighborhood. In the summer of '79, a serial killer who had broken out of the local asylum had slipped into her house in the dead of night and raped and killed her, along with her entire family. In the trauma of these events, she, in a way similar to Ed, shut out the world entirely and forgot off of her parents and siblings. Which is why in her afterlife she doesn't ever receive demands from non-existent parents, unlike many of the others. This gives her much more time to lounge around and party as often as she does. It didn't take too long before Ed joined the rest of the neighborhood. He was the child of two highly controlling professionals in the age of greed that, despite their constant absence, dominated his life. As such, Ed became quite the intellectual and rather meek and shy figure. Always the curious type, he loved to experiment with giving the time away from school and constant tours of his parents. This would lead to an untimely demise in 1986, as a gas leak combined with a busted burner from one of his experiments tore him and his house to pieces. Being the timid and subservient type, between various misadventures, Ed continued to follow the written orders of his parents long after his death. Kevin was the next to join the group. He was born to the day of Ed's death, and in many ways, his polar escape. Kevin came from a broken home and developed a bold personality. In life, he was clinical and angry and took out from it on many of the other children. His abusive father rarely paid him any attention in life, and would end up bringing about an end of it. In a drunken rage, his father beat him after Kevin attempted to stand up to him. He died on his way to the hospital in winter of 1999. His father spent the rest of his life in prison. In the afterlife, Kevin changed his perception to the opposite of what his life really was, with a distant father who would shower him with gifts. However, he continued to maintain his bullying even in death. Jimmy was the last to come to the cul-de-sac. He died in 2000, not long after moving into the house that Kevin's father had once lived in. He had leukemia since he was barely old enough to walk. As such, he had always a very sickly child, and due to his overprotective parents, he never really got to be around other children. He lived his day out in a small bedroom, completely neglected by the outside world. Jimmy lingered for quite some time in a state of near death, but in the end, family caved into the suffering of his lifelong illness. The Kinker sisters were different from any other denizens of the cul-de-sac. They were never the earthly plane of existence. Instead, they were the children of demons, not too dissimilar from this cube of human lore. They seemed to possess abilities impossible by the standards of others, such as the ability to appear nearly anywhere instantly. They were sent from hell to torment the already tortured souls of the neighborhood. Surprisingly, they are attracted to the edge for unknown reasons. Although it is speculated that they are the weakest-willed members of the neighborhood, and are seen as easy targets by them, despite that they are often universally loathed and often feared by everyone, including the Eds.